Hello, everyone. We'll just give people a couple minutes to get into the webinar, and then we will start shortly.
I will be right back. There's an alarm going off. I have to turn it off.
Okay, so we have a few people and they may be coming in, but we will get started now. So welcome everyone, and thank you for joining us today for this webinar / engagement event focused on the implementation framework for the right to a healthy environment under the Canadian Environmental Protection Act. So today, the Manitoba Eco-Network has invited staff from Environment Canada and Health Canada to speak about the work they're doing on the development of the framework and to discuss the focus of this first round of consultation. You're also going to hear some feedback from the Eco-Network that we've gathered from community members on this topic and get some additional insights from a Manitoba perspective from representatives of other organizations and students from Robson Hall Faculty of Law. A recording of the event will be available on the Manitoba Eco-Network website and YouTube channel for those who weren't able to attend today. So before we get into a bit more detail about the event and we meet our presenters, I'm going to hand things over to my co-moderator, Chantel Henderson, who's a board member at the Manitoba Eco-Network and someone who also has a lot of experience doing community-based work in Manitoba. Over to you, Chantel.
Good afternoon, everyone. As Heather mentioned, I am a board member at the Manitoba Eco-Network. I've been on the board for about 4 years, and I'm glad to be part of this panel, co-moderating. So basically, I'm just to do an introduction about the Manitoba Eco-Network. Since 1988, the Manitoba Eco-Network has promoted positive environmental action by supporting people and groups in our community. We are a public interest environmental organization seeking to promote and facilitate good environmental governance and the protection of Manitoba's environment for the benefit of current and future generations. Our mission is to promote good environmental governance, support and build capacity, advocate for environmental justice, and act as a bridge between environmental organizations, the public, and all levels of government. I'll also be doing the land acknowledgement. The Manitoba Eco-Network is located in Treaty 1 territory, the lands of the Anishinaabe, Innu, Ojibwe, Dakota, and Dene peoples, and is the national homeland of the Red River Métis. Our drinking water comes from Shoal Lake 40, First Nation and Treaty 3 territory, and our hydroelectricity is sourced from First Nation communities along the Nelson River in Treaty 5 territory. We are grateful to have the opportunity to live and work on this land. Take it away, Heather.
Thanks, Chantel. So to give everyone a bit of background information about the current work that the federal team is doing to develop the implementation framework, I'm going to pass things over to our first presenter, Sarah Vanderhoven. Let me get your slides ready. There you go.
Perfect. Thank you so much. Thank you for inviting us to come and present and to listen. So I'm Sarah Vandenhoven. I'm the manager of the Right to Healthy Environment Policy Division at Health Canada. And I'm joined today by a senior analyst from my team, Vanessa Ta. I'm also joined by a colleague at Environment and Climate Change Canada, who will also be presenting. So Sarah McPhee will be presenting a bit later. She's a senior analyst on the team at Environment and Climate Change Canada. So this is a joint project between both departments. And I'll just mention too that I know her manager, Lori Friesick, was really interested in attending these sessions, but unfortunately couldn't make it. So she is sending her regrets. But I just wanted to say we're so excited to hear the presentations and your feedback on the discussion document that is out currently. And we really appreciate the effort that you've taken to reach out within Manitoba to set up this session and help us shape the implementation framework for the right to healthy environment under the Canadian Environmental Protection Act, or CEPA. So I have a couple of slides on some background on CEPA and the right to a healthy environment, which is now recognized under the Act. So we thought it was important to start with a bit of a background on CEPA, because this is really the context within which the right to healthy environment applies. So CEPA provides tools to address a wide range of pollution risks, including substances. So that would be like chemicals and products of biotechnology, also hazardous wastes, marine pollution, emissions from vehicles, and environmental emergencies as well. Just as a couple of examples, maybe to help you understand some of the tools that exist under CEPA. One example would be health-based guidelines for drinking water contaminants. So these are developed and published under CEPA in collaboration with the provinces and territories. So those are guidelines then that are used by jurisdictions across Canada, and then are the basis for establishing drinking water quality requirements within the various jurisdictions. Another example would be programs under CEPA to monitor and assess air pollutants. So that would be pollutants like fine particulate matter, sulfur dioxide. And this work is also done in collaboration with provinces and territories to develop, review, and amend the Canadian ambient air quality standards. And then just maybe one more example would be the assessment, the risk assessment and management of risks to human health and the environment that are posed by chemicals. So maybe you've heard of the chemicals management plan. A lot of work under CEPA feeds into that. And so through these activities, a range of sources of exposure will be considered. So conducting a risk assessment of chemicals that may be found in consumer products, in food, cosmetics, or industrial releases. And then where risks are found, putting in place risk management measures to address the identified risks. So from those couple of examples, I think it helps to illustrate as well that there are roles for the provinces and territories as well in these areas of environmental health and other federal acts as well. But I'll just highlight, I guess, that the right to a healthy environment applies only within the context of CEPA and not those other acts. So on the next slide, we get into a bit more the recent amendments that were made to CEPA. So this happened this past June. Bill S5 received royal assent. It introduced a number of amendments to CEPA, including the recognition of the right to a healthy environment under the Act. And it also established a duty for the government to protect this right subject to reasonable limits. So the amendments require the development of an implementation framework to set out how the right will be considered in CEPA decision-making. We have 2 years from the date of royal assent to develop that framework. And there are some parameters for what it must include that I'll go through in the next slide, but I'll just first mention that CEPA does define for us that a healthy environment is one that is clean, healthy, and sustainable. And there were many other amendments that were made to CEPA as well, beyond the right. It also affirms the government's commitment to implementing the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People, including free, prior, and informed consent. And there are many other amendments that were made related to strengthening chemicals management and other issues. And there's a link on this slide if you're interested in learning more about those. In this session today, and this presentation will be focusing only on the amendments related to the right. So the next slide sets out sort of, I guess, the parameters that CEPA lays out for us on what must be included in the implementation framework. So it will need to set out how the right is considered in the administration of the Act. It will need to elaborate on mechanisms to support the protection of the right under CEPA. It will need to elaborate on the principles that have been identified in the Act, and that includes environmental justice, intergenerational equity, and non-regression, We have some slides in a later part of this session to get into those a little bit more. It will also elaborate on research, studies, and monitoring in support of the right under CEPA, and elaborate on relevant factors to be considered in determining the reasonable limits to which the right is subject. So the intention in the development of the implementation framework is to enable continuous improvement in implementation as experience is gained with how and when to consider the right when making decisions under CEPA. Within the amendments to CEPA, we also need to be reporting on progress and implementation of the framework in the CEPA annual report every year. And so I'll just explain sort of why this image on the right side of your screen is here. It's called the CEPA management cycle. And so this is a process that was set up, it has been set up for years to identify and address risks under CEPA. And so it helps, it sort of lays out how we determine if there is a risk to people and the environment from exposure to substances or chemicals, and then develop actions to respond to those risks. And so we saw this as being relevant to share, and in the context of the right, as we think there are opportunities within each of the steps of the CEPA cycle or decision points where the right and related principles can be considered. And so the discussion document often refers to the various steps in the CEPA cycle to provide examples of where we think this is, where work is currently happening in this area, or where there may be opportunities to do more. So then on the next slide, this lays out a bit our timelines. So as I mentioned, the implementation framework needs to be published within 2 years of Bill S5 receiving royal assent. We also need to provide opportunities for anyone who's interested to participate in its development. So our conversations today will feed into the development of the framework. We're at the point where you see the star on this timeline. So we've published a discussion document in early February to help us receive that early input. It includes some early ideas and some thinking on the framework that's out for public comment. And so the information presented today reflects some of these topics and issues that are raised in the discussion paper. So the public comment period on the discussion paper is open until April 8th. Then we'll be reviewing what we've received through those submissions and through sessions like today to help develop a draft implementation framework, which we're hoping to publish in the fall, also for public comment. And at that time, we would also publish a What We Heard report to share what we've heard through this public comment period and through sessions like this. So then once that draft is published, it again goes for public comment. We'll receive input and then update the implementation framework to come out with a final within that 2-year time frame of Bill S5 receiving royal assent. And so we expect that there will be ongoing work to implement, monitor, and report on the framework in partnership with stakeholders and Indigenous peoples and the public throughout and really beyond the final implementation framework as well. So that's the last slide I have as an intro. I can pass it back to you, Heather.
Thank you very much. That was very helpful. So now that we all have a bit more information on what it is that we're going to be talking about, I'm going to give you a bit of insight about where I have gotten all of the information that I'm going to share with you today. So as we noted, when you registered, part of the purpose of today's event is for me to present to you, the public, all of the really great things that I've heard from Manitobans, members of our network, students, and experts over the last basically 3 years on the right to a healthy environment, to try and give a bit of a Manitoba perspective on the issue and some context of how we might be approaching this very, very complicated topic, as Sarah gave us very good insight into all these complicated pieces. So we've been doing a lot of work on the right to a healthy environment and environmental rights from different contexts in the last number of years. So a big piece of the inspiration for our work came from a project that we started in 2021 that was led by my colleague Alexandra, and I assisted with the legal and policy side of things. And this was our Healthy Environment, Healthy Neighborhood project, which I'll talk a little bit more about right away. Because of this work on the Healthy Environment, Healthy Neighborhood project, which we refer to as the HEN project, and so I will probably do the same moving forward. We also ended up engaging in the federal parliamentary process for Bill S5. So as Sarah talked about, the implementation framework and the recognition of the right to a healthy environment and some of these other good changes that we're talking about today basically originated from a federal bill, Bill S5, and the Manitoba Eco-Network gave the feedback of the community members from our HEN project on what we thought the right should look like, as well as we also addressed some other topics that came out of the Bill S5 discussion. We've also been trying to do a lot more public environmental legal education and have conversations with Manitobans about the types of environmental law topics they're interested and their ideas for improving things moving forward. And a lot of that has happened within the context of our Navigating the Law to Protect the Environment project, which is a collaborative project we've undertaken in partnership with the Public Interest Law Center and a colleague from the University of Winnipeg, Dr. Patricia Fitzpatrick. And so one of the topics that we've explored through webinars and in an in-person event that we held in the fall was recognition of environmental human rights, including the right to a healthy environment. So I'll share some thoughts that we got from people at that event as well. And then finally, specific to this discussion paper and the conversation today, we also sent out some surveys to our network and basically anyone we thought might be interested in responding. And so I'll be sharing that feedback that I received as well. Lots of really good thinking coming from slightly different perspectives, because we also, we do not have recognized environmental rights at the provincial level in Manitoba. So lots of great feedback that I'm really excited to share. We also invited some community members and students and representatives of other NGOs to provide their feedback directly today. And so you'll be hearing from some of those people throughout the event today as well. So just to really give a context of how we've approached this topic and the kind of lens that we've used when we think about environmental justice and environmental rights, I'm just going to give a bit of background on our HEN project. So Healthy Environment, Healthy Neighborhood, but I'm going to call it HEN. So this research project that, again, myself and my colleague undertook involved gathering insights from community members living in inner city and mature neighborhoods in Winnipeg. So I put a little map here, and all of these blue and green areas were the kind of context that we were approaching this topic, as well as our Bill S5 commentary through. There is a lot of different types of people living in these areas. It really depends on the specific context and who exactly we were talking to, but it included long-term residents, people who had been long advocating to try and make things better in terms of environmental and health impacts in their communities. There's lots of low-income individuals, Indigenous peoples, people of color, and also a lot of new Canadians. So a lot of the people in this area, as well as the kind of contextual factors in terms of the types of areas they're living in and how close they are to historical industrial operations, most of these people that we spoke with would be considered a vulnerable population. So one of the changes to Bill that happened out of Bill S5 was recognition of this idea that there are vulnerable populations out there. I know there's also other language being considered which I believe is disproportionately impacted communities, which we also very much like, but I will probably just stick with vulnerable as it's a common term that we've used and I think is still being discussed in this context. So the people that we've heard from and spoken with and gotten a lot of our ideas from would fall into this category of a vulnerable population. So people that are basically living in areas where they have a higher susceptibility and more likelihood of facing negative consequences from industrial operations and other things that can cause contamination in their neighborhoods. So we have a lot of really excellent findings that came out of this project. I, of course, just going to be talking about one small piece of them, but a lot of the outcomes that we found from this project do align directly with the pieces that are being thought of for the implementation framework. So I thought it was important to mention that. So for example, we had a number of recommendations related to the experiences of community members in terms of environmental and health impacts. So we were able to document a bunch of concerns and potential impacts these community members are facing in Winnipeg. We also heard a lot about improving access to justice. So community members in these areas felt that they had limited access to environmental justice. So for example, one of the things we heard was that a lack of recognized environmental rights contributed to this lack of access to justice. We heard from lots of community members that felt ignored by government at all levels. And really a common theme that you'll hear from me today is a lot of interest in having more access, more involvement, and more information about what's going on so that citizens not only can better understand what's happening, but also how they can be involved moving forward. And specifically, we did have recommendations related to the right to a healthy environment, as well as improving protections for vulnerable populations. And I'll provide more insights into some of this feedback later, but just so you get an understanding that these are important issues to Manitobans. We've been hearing for years feedback on these specific pieces, and one of our big hopes in terms of the outcome of the implementation framework is, again, making changes in these areas. The other piece that you'll hear me talking about that I know our communities are community members are very interested in is potential improvements to monitoring, testing, and investigation. So when we talk about procedural duties and tools, I will share some more insights that we got from this project on the need for more data and funding and support for community-based research. Also, just before we start getting into the actual subject matter of the discussion paper, I just wanted to give a little overview of how the Eco-Network approached the right to a healthy environment when we were engaging through the parliamentary process. And so while we did make recommendations about a number of things, specifically in terms of the right to a healthy environment and the implementation framework, our position, which again has very much influenced what you're going to hear from me throughout the rest of the presentation today, is that we were looking for terminology and approaches that align with how the United Nations have been thinking about environmental rights. Community members are very interested in a broad definition of the healthy environment to make sure that it captures all of the important pieces that they see contributing to health in general. Citizens are very, I find our community members were really not fond of the idea that there would be potential limits on the right to a healthy environment. This is not something we're really going to be touching on today, but it is something that we will be discussing in more detail in the written submission we're planning to provide next week. And then also, again, more language about providing specific supports for citizens and trying to address some of the continuing problems with CEPA that have prevented citizens from using tools like Section 22, which would facilitate citizens going to court. So overall, we are very excited and happy that the right to a healthy environment was recognized. We're very pleased to be involved in the development of the implementation framework, but we definitely recognize that there is a need for further improvements to CEPA and a lot of changes that could be made to benefit community members and vulnerable populations. So again, that's why we're thrilled to share more detailed insights with you today and then in our written submission next week. A few more things before I hand things over to the other Sarah. But basically, just to give you a little oversight on the rest of the event, so you know what is in store for you on this journey. But basically, we're going to now be exploring specific topics from the discussion paper and then hearing feedback from myself and the other presenters that we've invited to be here today. We're going to start with a discussion of Indigenous rights. Then we're going to talk about the new legal principles that have been added to CEPA and end with a discussion of the meaning and the potential impact of the new right to a healthy environment. So if you're someone who's in the audience and you would like to ask a comment or a question, because I will be pausing to give opportunity to address any questions, either from other presenters or if we have any audience questions or comments, please add them to the chat or the Q&A function. And myself and my Eco-Network colleagues will watch and make sure that we address those questions throughout. So now I will hand things over to Sarah to get into our first topic.
Well, hello, thank you. Can you hear me okay? Okay. So I just wanted to note that I am a grateful uninvited guest on Treaty 4 territory in the homeland of the Métis. So I'm joining you from Regina today, and I always feel such a kinship with my Manitobans. So I'm very pleased to hear some prairie perspectives today. So this part of the presentation is to talk about how the framework could address and approach Indigenous rights and Indigenous knowledge within the context of the right to healthy environment under CEPA. So on the next slide, we talk about the Government of Canada's commitment to the renewed nation-to-nation, Inuit Crown, and government-to-government relationships with First Nations, Inuit, Métis, modern treaty partners, and self-governance. This is relevant to informing the consideration of the right to a healthy environment under CEPA and the development of this implementation framework. For example, Section 35 of the Constitution Act sets out how the Government of Canada has a duty to consult and, where appropriate, accommodate Indigenous groups when it considers conduct that might adversely impact potential or established Aboriginal or treaty rights. The United Nations Declarations on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples Act, or UNDA, is another law that can help us discuss and understand the implementation of the right to healthy environment under CEPA. The UN Declaration affirms a range of collective and individual Indigenous rights, which constitute minimum standards to contribute to the survival, dignity, and well-being of Indigenous peoples. While the UN Declaration must be read and understood in its entirety, some articles that are particularly relevant to us in developing the framework are Articles 21, 24, and 29. We will also be following the guidance and calls to action from the report on the Royal Commission of Aboriginal Peoples, RCAP, the Truth and Reconciliation Calls to Action, and the final report and calls to action from the National Inquiry into Missing Murdered Indigenous Women and Girls. We are very grateful for these guiding documents and all of the important work that has gone into them. But we do want to acknowledge that we're not experts, we are not Indigenous knowledge keepers, and that's why engagement with Indigenous peoples is essential. We are working directly with many Indigenous organizations and nations to support a distinctions-based engagement and activities that can help guide the development of this framework. So on the next slide, in the development of this framework, we're really interested in hearing perspectives on how Indigenous knowledge can be considered in supporting protection of the right. The CEPA preamble now states that the Government of Canada recognizes the role of science and Indigenous knowledge in the process of making decisions related to the protection of the environment and human health. There may be opportunities to include Indigenous knowledge and Indigenous science more often and more consistently at all stages of the CEPA management cycle that Sarah showed you a few slides ago. While respecting Indigenous data sovereignty, the CARE principles for Indigenous data governance, and Article 31 of the UN Declaration. CEPA programs could learn from existing Indigenous knowledge policy frameworks and approaches under other acts, such as the Indigenous Knowledge Policy Framework for project reviews and regulatory decisions. This framework helps guide the implementation of Indigenous knowledge provisions in the Impact Assessment Act, Canada Navigable Waters Act, the Canada Energy Regulator Act, and the Fish and Fish Habitat Protection provisions of the Fisheries Act. Two-eyed seeing is another approach being supported by Environment and Climate Change Canada. The 48th priority of the UNDA Action Plan calls on the government to build on important work that has already occurred to recognize, elevate, and incorporate Indigenous science into Environment and Climate Change Canada scientific inquiry by continuing to stand up the new Indigenous Science Division established in 2022 to bridge, braid, and weave Indigenous science with Western science to inform ECCC's science policy and program decision-making. So in the development of the framework, we're asking for feedback from Indigenous partners on the following questions. How can the right to a healthy environment under CEPA support the priorities of First Nations, Inuit, Métis, modern treaty partners, and self-governments? How can the framework meaningfully consider Indigenous knowledge systems and bring them together with Western knowledge systems to inform science policy and program decision-making? And are there specific distinctions-based elements you would like to see incorporated into the implementation framework? These are really big questions requiring a lot of thought, and we're very hopeful to get some insight and guidance on them through this process. So I think I'll pass it over to Chantel now, or Heather.
Yes, thanks, Sarah. And we will be handing it over to Chantel.
All right, so here at the Manitoba Eco-Network, we are striving to amplify Indigenous voices. I was probably the first Indigenous person on the board, so that's big headway, and now we have two, and we're always open to having more on the board. So basically, we feel that and voices like mine should be taken priority, especially when it comes to the land and the health of our people on the land, and especially with the climate change happening. Our people are seeing it more, I guess, more evidently. So basically, should be amplifying our voices, First Nations, Métis, Inuit, and basically that we have the determining, the meaning, impact of the right to a healthy environment, and other changes to CEPA on Indigenous rights and the engagement of Indigenous peoples in CEPA processes. So Manitoba Eco-Network supports changes that ensure CEPA aligns with the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples and empower Indigenous peoples to be more meaningfully involved in CEPA processes. So this includes better inclusion of Indigenous traditional knowledge in CEPA decision-making processes. So that can look like engaging with, First Nation communities, if there's anywhere that, the environment is impacted, First Nations, territories, consulting with elders, knowledge keepers, not just looking to leadership, and also, including those voices as well, because, our people have, time immemorial of knowledge to share, and they are the ones who see, the changes happening on the land first and foremost. So it's definitely a great idea to amplify all Indigenous voices when it comes to the environment and the health impacts, and obviously involvement in CEPA processes. So, yeah.
Thank you, Chantel. So yes, we're very pleased to know that you're doing some work with other organizations in Manitoba, like the Manitoba Métis Federation, and we definitely look forward to seeing some of the insights shared from Indigenous peoples and governments and organizations that will be incorporated into the next phase of the consultation and the draft framework. So not seeing any questions or comments from the people attending, we can move on to the next topic, which are the principles under CEPA, and I will hand it back to Sarah.
Well, hello again. Okay, thank you. I think we can go right into the next slide here. So as Sarah mentioned, CEPA now specifies that the framework must, at a minimum, elaborate on these three principles that you see on the slide. Today's presentation will focus mostly on environmental justice and intergenerational equity, but today I'll just talk quickly about non-regression as well. CEPA does not currently include definitions or description of non-regression or environmental justice in the context of the Act, but it does provide some context on intergenerational equity, which is closely related to the concept of sustainable development, which is a principle already defined within CEPA. So because of this, we're very interested to know what these concepts mean to people in Canada. We're very keen to hear regional perspectives on this as well. So happy to be in the presence of some lovely Manitobans today to hear the Manitoba perspective on what these principles mean. These principles listed on the slide are not the only principles that guide decision-making under CEPA. There are others listed on the right-hand side that are already included in decision-making through CEPA processes. On non-regression, this principle has no universal definition, but it generally refers to maintaining the current levels of protection. It may apply to all stages of the CEPA cycle, but may be particularly relevant when designing enforceable tools like regulations and pollution prevention planning notices, as well as non-enforceable risk management instruments like guidelines, codes of practice, or agreements. Non-regression may also refer to continuous improvement in protection in risk management actions developed under CEPA that may include updating or replacing these actions when additional knowledge or information is obtained that demonstrates that the initial risk management action is not effective at protecting the environment or human health. I'll just go to the next slide now and jump into environmental justice. And Heather, you did a really great job of prefacing this, so thank you for that. Sorry, some of this might be a little bit repetitious, but I hope it's still helpful. The principle of environmental justice in CEPA decision-making includes consideration of the avoidance of adverse effects that disproportionately affect vulnerable populations. So like Heather mentioned, currently, CEPA uses the term vulnerable population, which is defined as a group of individuals within the population living in Canada who, due to a greater susceptibility or greater exposure, may be at increased risk of experiencing adverse health effects from exposure to substances. In this presentation and in general now in materials on the right to a healthy environment, we have been using the term populations who may be disproportionately impacted instead of vulnerable populations. This is in recognition that many of those populations are not inherently vulnerable, but rather that their susceptibility is associated with circumstances of their lives. With that in mind, populations who might be disproportionately impacted by pollution or chemical exposure could include Indigenous, Black, or other racialized people, QSLGBTQI+ people, women, persons with disabilities, and other marginalized people such as the very young, older adults, or people who experience structural inequity, poverty, or isolation. Environmental justice includes improved procedural, recognitional, and distributive justice with respect to environmental processes and outcomes. Like Heather said, procedural and recognitional justice seek to improve the ways in which decisions are made so that those affected by environmental injustice are reflected and represented in the decision-making spaces. The UN Declaration similarly reflects the importance of participation in decision-making affecting Indigenous peoples, including in Articles 18, 19, and 29. Distributive justice involves identifying the ways in which populations face disproportionate environmental burdens, such as pollution, and seeks to improve environmental benefits and reduce environmental burden for those communities. Decision-making mechanisms under CEPA recognize that some populations are disproportionately affected by the harmful effect of chemicals and pollutants. For example, currently under CEPA, populations who may be disproportionately impacted by pollution are considered by collecting information on susceptibility and exposure through research and monitoring, using this information in the risk assessment, and then considering the findings at the risk management stage. Private Members Bill C-226, an act respecting the development of a national strategy to assess, prevent, and address environmental racism and to advance environmental justice, was introduced in February 2022, and if passed, it will require the development of a national strategy. It's important to note that that national strategy would reflect environmental justice priorities across the government as compared to what we're talking about today, which is the right to a healthy environment, applying only to CEPA and considering environmental justice as it applies to decision-making under CEPA. On intergenerational equity, while it is not currently defined in CEPA, intergenerational equity is described as relating to meeting the needs of the present generation without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their own needs. This is very closely related to the principle of sustainable development in CEPA. Both can be applied across the CEPA cycle. In the context of CEPA, considerations related to intergenerational equity may include a substance's potential to persist in the environment, So certain chemicals are able to remain in the environment for long periods of time, which could have a long-term impact on environmental impacts affecting enjoyment of land, water, or food sources. Under CEPA, criteria related to persistence and to bioaccumulation, which is the gradual accumulation of substances in living tissues, have been long established through policy and regulations and are key considerations in the prioritization, assessment, and risk management of substances. A substance's potential to impact reproduction or genetic material and the cumulative effects from exposure to multiple sources causing these effects could also be relevant in consideration of intergenerational equity. This could include endocrine-related effects that impact fertility and reproductive success, or mutagenic chemicals, which can cause irreversible and heritable changes in genetic material. Consideration of endocrine disrupting properties and endocrine-related effects is an important aspect of prioritizing substances for risk assessment and characterizing the hazard of those substances in risk assessments under CEPA. So I'll pass it back to Heather to hear more about the Manitoba perspective on these principles.
Thanks, Sarah. So as both Sarahs have made it very clear, this implementation framework and the work that's coming out from their team is going to be in a very CEPA specific context. Definitely some of the feedback we received that I'll be sharing today is probably a little bit broad, but I thought it was important to give you kind of the full sense of what we're hearing from Manitobans. Because as I've discussed already with the team, the Eco-Network's very much viewing this as an opportunity to influence the development of the implementation framework, but also to influence some of these other exciting developments at the federal level, like a potential expansion of the right to a healthy environment in other contexts, as well as all the exciting work happening around Bill C-226. So everyone can just keep that in mind. So I've divided up this my presentation today when I give feedback on these topics into kind of two categories. So first I'll talk about what we've heard from community members that the topic means to them, and then I'll try and give some feedback on how Manitobans are thinking about this implementation framework influencing changes to CEPA and improvements for them specifically. So in terms of what environmental justice means, I would say this is definitely a very complicated topic to talk about, and it's very contextual. So I think it really depends on the specific way that environmental justice is going to be applied within the CEPA context, and also again, can change depending on the personal experiences of the person that you're actually asking about. So generally, what we've heard from Manitobans in terms of what environmental justice should mean, one of the core themes, of course, is that it should be something that contributes to improved protections for citizens, both in terms of health and environment from harm. Environmental justice has also definitely been viewed as kind of an outcome of the process. So there are certain things that citizens would like to see happen as a result of the recognition of environmental justice and its influence on the process. So things like making sure polluters and those who violate the provisions of CEPA are held directly responsible for the harms they've caused. And I'll talk a little bit about that in the next slide. Environmental justice is also seen as an approach that will amplify the importance of environmental protection and make it more of a priority. So one of the things that I've heard a lot from citizens is that there's an overwhelming feeling that the economic impact of chemicals and the economic benefits that can occur for industry and government as a result of some chemical substances being approved or having lesser restrictions than some might like, is that often this ends up overshadowing the kind of environmental protection piece that citizens are really looking for. Environmental justice is also viewed as a mechanism that's going to help address and ongoing harms to marginalized communities. Of course, the definition and understanding of environmental justice is very much linked to the concept of environmental racism, which again is something that will be explored more in the context of Bill C-226. But Manitobans are definitely seeing direct linkages from this work to that work as well. And overall, environmental justice in a lot of ways is seen as an approach that's going to allow citizens to live in a healthy environment, regardless of their race or economic status, and to have meaningful impact into the decisions that affect their lives. One thing that we have seen throughout all of our feedback, again, is what Chantal was speaking to, the idea that Indigenous voices need to be amplified, and that environmental justice also means things like seeking free, prior, and informed consent from Indigenous communities, and lots of kind of supports and tools for citizens so that they can access justice and protect their rights of interests. In particular, there seems to be an emphasis on restorative justice, which I will talk about in a little bit, and the needs to really amplify the voices of those who have lived experience and those who live in vulnerable environments. So really talking to the people that experience past harms and the barriers that are currently occurring under CEPA, and ultimately figuring out a way to help reduce those barriers and again, ensure better protection and engagement from these communities. So this is a topic that we really engaged with in the context of the Healthy Environment, Healthy Neighborhood project. So in the discussion paper, especially later on when procedural duties are discussed, there is mention of procedural justice, distributive justice, and recognitional justice, which Manitobans have recognized as those are important elements and a really helpful way to think about what environmental justice means and how it can be applied. And there's also the fourth category of restorative justice that, again, we've received feedback that is kind of a missing piece from the framework right now. And a lot of that, again, has to do with the tangible tools and legal responses that are available to citizens to help them enforce their rights, and again, ensure that polluters are being held accountable for the harms that they've caused, and lots of good things there. I'll also just point out that to the people attending this, that there is one legal definition of environmental justice in Canadian law that I want to point out from the Environmental Rights Act of the Northwest Territories, which I think does a good job of capturing the equity piece of environmental justice. So it's defined as a just distribution of environmental benefits and burdens among residents of the Northwest Territories. So this definition, I think, aligns very well with what Manitobans are thinking. But again, there's that whole enforcement piece that is also coming out that I think falls more into the restorative justice category. And so how should this new principle influence CEPA processes? So we've gotten a lot of really great feedback. I'm not going to go through all of it today because these slides will be available and we will have our written feedback as well. But again, making sure people have access to healthy environments, making sure that Indigenous peoples and others have the right to cultural justice, and determining how the process is going to affect them and making sure that their voices are amplified. A theme that I'll talk about more than once throughout is the fact that achieving environmental justice and the right to a healthy environment is very much connected to getting youth involved, providing more public education, and increased supports for the public and vulnerable communities. There's also some comments that, again, pop up in other areas with suggestions of environmental justice would mean a move towards more independent oversight, not so much reliance on kind of the self-regulation of industry, but basically there being more transparency and accountability from government and industry and the people that are providing all of the very complicated but important data that comes out of CEPA processes. And then, of course, harsher punishments for polluters, which I've already mentioned, but that was a definite theme in this category of environmental justice. So just a couple of really good quotes here that, again, I thought emphasized how Manitobans are approaching this very broadly. They're seeing it as both a kind of lens through which to assess and analyze current CEPA processes to find gaps and things that need to be changed to improve equity and access. But also it's very much an approach that will hopefully increase the protections, not just for humans, but the environment as a whole, in terms of how the laws and the regulations and other things are applied under CEPA. And then getting on to intergenerational equity, and you will hear this is another kind of topic that there are themes throughout all of the feedback in terms of what intergenerational equity means and the value of youth voices. And so in terms of what this has meant to Manitobans, lots of discussion about basically better understanding and trying to prevent negative impacts in the future. So calls for lots of studies and recognition, so we have a better understanding of potential effects on future generations. But then again, intergenerational equity was interpreted as basically requiring a lot of different supports to get youth more engaged and more involved in processes. So in terms of how intergenerational equity should influence CEPA processes, we've had suggestions about how to get youth better considered within decisions. So the suggestion that there could be decision-making criteria developed so that we know for sure the youth perspectives are being considered, having youth directly involved in different processes, and kind of a commitment to independent and community-based research to, again, get that better understanding of long-term effects and effects on future generations, which requires essentially tracking environmental quality of health now so that we know how things change over time. And then again, a common theme of wanting kind of harsher punishments for polluters to discourage negative behavior that will potentially impact future generations. So basically fixing things now so that it will be better for future generations. Actually, I am just going to stop share. So that is the summary of what I've heard from the Manitoba Eco-Network. And I'm actually now going to turn it over to Anna to share her thoughts on this topic.
Thank you so much. So hello, everyone. My name is Anna. I'm here with Cassie and Stanny on behalf of the Rights Clinic at the University of Manitoba, Faculty of Law. The Rights Clinic advocates for the protection and advancement of rights, including environmental rights. We're a part of a team of law students that have been researching environmental rights to understand how the right to a healthy environment has been recognized in law in Canada. We've also been identifying best practices and developing ideas about the way environmental rights should be recognized in Manitoba and at the federal level. We believe the steps that have been taken in Canada to address environmental issues have not gone far enough, and transformative change is needed to address climate change and the environmental crisis more broadly. One way to create such change is through new environmental law approaches, such as the legal recognition of environmental rights. We are here today to share what we've learned about environmental rights and to provide some thoughts on the topics covered in the discussion paper. At the outset, we want to point out that the research we have done on establishing the best approach for Manitoba has been confusing and overwhelming. This is because there doesn't appear to be consensus on how to tackle environmental rights in Canada. From a legal perspective, we think of the right to a healthy environment as having two main components: substantive rights and procedural rights. Substantive rights, such as the right to a healthy environment, indicate the scope of legal protections and the environmental elements that are necessary for citizens to prosper, such as clean air and safe water. Meanwhile, procedural rights give citizens tools to exercise and enforce substantive rights, such as access to environmental information or the ability to initiate a lawsuit. Environmental rights create a link between human rights and the environment, providing citizens with various legal tools to protect the environment and access environmental justice. While Cassie and Stanny will speak to the substantive and procedural rights, I will be focusing on environmental principles which help to guide and implement these rights. So an important part of the implementation framework will be to provide more guidance on what some of the new legal principles added to the Canadian Environmental Protection Act mean and how they will influence decision processes under the Act. This includes the principle of, as we've discussed, intergenerational equity, the principle of environmental justice, and the principle of non-regression. So we think that the right to a healthy environment should be implemented in a manner consistent with these new principles, and these principles will help guide policymakers, citizens, and courts in the implementation, interpretation, and enforcement of the right to a healthy environment, along with influencing changes to other important processes under the Act. So first, the principle of intergenerational equity should ensure that the current generation holds the environment in trust for future generations and has an obligation to use its resources in a way that leaves the environment in the same or better condition for future generations. This principle informs our recommendation that young people should receive more accessible education on substantive environmental rights and how to use the procedural rights to enforce and access them. For context, my colleagues and I are in our third year of law school, and we have found it intimidating and confusing to know exactly what our environmental rights are. If we face difficulty in understanding these rights from the research we have done over this last year, we imagine that youth without legal knowledge would experience even greater difficulty. We believe that increasing educational opportunities for youth to learn about environmental rights, and particularly the right to a healthy environment, will equip youth with the information they need to participate. These opportunities can be made available in their schools, on government websites, and through community events. This education is useful for youth who are already engaged in environmental issues, and for youth who want to be engaged but need more information to participate in the first place. Having access to information is crucial for public participation in environmental decision-making. While there are opportunities to increase access to information on environmental rights, youth already have valuable insights into the environmental needs of their generation and have innovative solutions with respect to sustainable development. There are numerous examples of youth leading action on climate change at the local and national level, as well as across the world. Therefore, it is necessary for the Act to include mechanisms for more youth involvement, either in an advisory capacity, direct decision-making, or both. To summarize, youth have important contributions to make in realizing the right to a healthy environment, and this right should be guided by the principle of intergenerational equity. Second, the principle of environmental justice should ensure the fair treatment and meaningful public participation of all people, regardless of race, national origin, or income, with respect to the development, implementation, and enforcement of environmental laws, regulations, and policies. A major barrier to accessing environmental justice is found in the wording of Section 22 of the Act, which outlines the circumstances of when an individual may bring an action. This section will be mentioned again by my colleague, and we know it is outside the scope of the implementation framework, but we felt it was necessary to bring attention to it. Section 22(2) states that an individual who has applied for an investigation may bring an environmental protection action if the minister's response to the investigation was unreasonable. This wording creates unnecessary barriers for people to bring in action, including those in the legal community, but especially residents who face additional barriers. In 2007, the House of Commons Standing Committee on Environment and Sustainable Development released a report that this provision should be amended because this wording created too many barriers for allowing an environmental protection action to be brought to the courts. The report recommended that this provision should be amended to instead allow an environmental protection action to be brought if the offense may result in harm or serious risk of harm to the environment or human, animal, or plant life or health. We believe that this wording is more in line with the principle of environmental justice because it reduces the barriers for bringing environmental action. Finally, the principle of non-regression is a prohibition on state acts or omissions that result in degradation to the environment, such as air quality, water quality, and biodiversity, or in laws designed to protect the environment. Moving forward, the environmental protections and standards set under the Act should only get stronger, and public engagement processes should only become more meaningful and accessible. No regulatory changes should be made that would weaken these processes, including changes that could potentially limit public participation. That's all that I have. Thank you for your time.
Thanks, Anna. That was super. Okay, back to screen sharing. Okay, hopefully everyone can see my deck again. Oh, okay, seeing no comments or questions, although I did see one question already get answered, we can move on to our next topic where we have the most feedback from our presenters. So I'll hand it over to Sarah. Oh no, this is the one that I'm talking about. Never mind. I'm not handing it over. I am talking about this topic. My bad. Okay. So this this topic, which is I think one of the trickiest but most exciting to talk about, is basically what does the right to a healthy environment mean? So the discussion paper does get into this a bit, and we've already heard about some of the ways that the right to a healthy environment has already been defined within CEPA, which I'll talk about. But I thought it was really important in the context of all of this discussion to get a sense from Manitobans on what they actually feel the right to a healthy environment means to them. And again, think more about how we would know if things were working to protect the right to a healthy environment. So this is a slide from another presentation by the implementation team that I thought was really helpful. So again, they have asked what does it mean to you in the context of CEPA? And so I do think it is very helpful how things have been framed into the kind of 6 categories of protections that CEPA provides, which I will talk about in a little bit. So what are substantive elements? So this gets into definitely a bit more of a legal discussion, so I'm going to try and be brief. But basically, when new environmental rights are recognized, or human rights in general are recognized, part of their purpose is to try and help establish a basic standard of living and treatment by others, including government actors. And part of the reason it's so difficult to talk about what the right to a healthy environment means is that even though it's been recognized in many countries, and the discussion paper gives some excellent examples in Appendix A of how things have been thought about internationally, there really is no consensus in terms of what the right to a healthy environment means legally, and again, in very different contexts. So it has been described in law in different ways, and it's also discussed in academic commentary and in discussions with the public in very different ways. So like environmental justice, this is a part of the conversation in which we've heard from Manitobans should be very broad in terms of thinking about what it means, and any kind of limitations on the scope should be more about how it applies in the actual system, but the actual kind of definition and approach should be very broad. So just to go back to what Sarah discussed earlier, we do have a legal definition of a healthy environment in CEPA in Section 3, which means an environment that is clean, healthy, and sustainable. And I also provided another example from the Quebec Human Rights Code, in which environmental human rights are recognized in Quebec, and they talk about a healthful environment and talk about preserving biodiversity. So there are lots of different elements and meanings to what the right to a healthy environment means in a legal context, but also to regular people. So one of the things that the Eco-Network has liked and has found helpful, as well as the people that responded to our survey, is that we found the way that the United Nations has approached the topic of environmental rights to be helpful. So the UN has recognized 6 different elements of the right to a healthy environment that basically are supposed to help articulate the scope of protections and again get into what it actually might mean. So these recognized elements are safe climate, clean air, healthy ecosystems and biodiversity, safe and sufficient water, healthy and sustainable food, and a non-toxic environment. So when we actually receive feedback from students on what this, students and also lots of community members on what this means, this I will just note is a topic that I talk about with my law students a lot in class. So I've had lots of fun discussions as well. But really, this is a topic that Manitobans see as having a very broad meaning, and again, is something that I think means different things to different people depending on the context. So one of the main themes that we heard in our feedback was that the application of the right should go beyond humans. It shouldn't just be about human environmental health and protecting humans. it needs to include broader considerations of ecosystem health and the protection of natural entities. So I heard from participants about needing to extend protections to animals, to natural entities, so to rivers, lakes, plant life, things like that, as well as protection of sacred spaces. So spaces in the environment and species that have very sacred meanings to Indigenous peoples as well. We've also heard from participants that it would be helpful if there was some kind of scientific indicators developed so that this could be tracked in a scientific way, perhaps based on the parameters of health, so different scientific indicators of health. And it was also noted that figuring out what the right to a healthy environment means is something that might need a bit of a more of an objective approach. If we define things too narrowly or it's not flexible enough, there's potential for vulnerable populations to end up being subjected to a different standard of healthy, because as we understand, vulnerable populations in general may need more supports and actions to get them to a similar level of health than other categories of people in Canada. So in terms of indicators of a healthy environment, again, we heard a range of broad different things. Feedback that the UN elements did a good job of capturing things, although we did have feedback that it's kind of vague, which I think is how everyone feels about those indicators. But again, a healthy environment links to the health of human and animals. It contributes to citizens feeling safer. It can contribute to laws and policies that protect citizens from negative environmental and health impacts. It can include things like access to green space. And an indicator would be ecosystems with lots of biodiversity and lots of healthy, vibrant flora and fauna. And of course, clean air and clean water are things that we heard a lot from citizens. So that is what you'll hear from me in terms of what a healthy environment needs. And then you will hear from a few other presenters now on what this right means to them. So first, I'm going to hand things over to Pierre from Animal Justice.
Thank you, Heather. I'm going to share my screen. Let's see if that works. It's not always a given. Okay, just a sec. Is it looking okay-ish now?
Looks great.
Okay, thanks. So yeah, I'm going to talk about including animals in the framework for implementing CEPA. I'm a lawyer with Animal Justice based in Ottawa, but my boss is based in Winnipeg, so I think that's why I've been invited here today. Animal Justice is a national animal law advocacy organization. I want to talk about a topic that extends beyond traditional environmental sustainability. It's about broadening our commitment to environmental stewardship to encompass all beings that share our planet. I want to focus on the role of animals in maintaining the health of our ecosystems and advocate for their inclusion in the framework for implementing CEPA. CEPA has laid the groundwork for defining a healthy environment as one that is clean, sustainable, and supportive of life. But there's something missing in this definition: the explicit inclusion of animals. Animals are not only inhabitants of their ecosystems, they are foundational to the ecosystem's existence and functioning. You could say their health is a mirror reflecting the state of the environment, and overlooking the link between animal welfare and environmental health ultimately undermines environmental sustainability. Animals act as crucial indicators of environmental quality. The state of their health and the dynamics of their populations provide insight into the condition of their habitats and the broader ecosystem. Ensuring the well-being of animals is a necessity for accurately gauging the health of the environment and taking measures to address threats. Incorporating animals into our concept of a healthy environment is also a matter of ethical responsibility. All animals have intrinsic value and the right to a habitat that is safe and life-sustaining. This principle is gaining recognition internationally, linking animal protection directly to R2HE. By embedding animal considerations into the implementation framework of CEPA, Canada can position itself as a leader in environmental sustainability. So animal justice recommends that Canada should recognize animals as fundamental components of a healthy environment. This recognition should be included in the objectives and guiding principles of the framework, making it clear that environmental protection encompasses the well-being of all living creatures. Now, with regard to the concept of environmental justice, this principle should extend beyond human communities to include animals. The current conversation around environmental justice focuses on human populations, neglecting the strong connection between environmental well-being and animal welfare. Sentient animals are severely impacted by environmental degradation and pollution, yet they are left out of conversations despite facing habitat destruction and exposure to toxins. Expanding the definition of environmental justice to incorporate animals acknowledges their vulnerability and is recognition of the need for their equitable treatment within environmental decision-making processes. Just as human populations face systemic discrimination and environmental hazards, animals face similar challenges. Therefore, animal justice recommends that we broaden the scope of environmental justice to include animals, taking a holistic approach to environmental governance that promotes fairness, equity, and sustainability for all animals, human and non-human. The addition of vulnerable population to CEPA aims to protect groups at increased risk of adverse health effects from environmental hazards. It's important to recognize that animals also belong to this category. Their exposure to pollution, their limited mobility, their biological sensitivities, and the impacts of climate change make them inherently vulnerable. Therefore, animal justice recommends an expanded definition of vulnerable population that encompasses animals. By doing so, we ensure that comprehensive protection under CEPA extends to all vulnerable beings, acknowledging their risk and bolstering our commitment to safeguarding them. The notion of vulnerable environment must also evolve to recognize ecosystems, habitats, and geographic areas that are critical to the survival and well-being of animals. This broader understanding is necessary to ensure the protection of wildlife populations, ecological processes, and the welfare of animals. Therefore, animal justice recommends a redefinition of vulnerable environment that places animals at the forefront of environmental protection efforts, ensuring the preservation of their habitats and, by extension, the health of our planet. Lastly, it's important to address the limitations posed by social and economic factors on the consideration of rights under CEPA. While these factors are relevant, they're present, they're not going to go away, they should not overshadow the Act's core objectives. Viewing ecosystems and animals through an economic lens often fails to capture their intrinsic worth, leading to decisions that prioritize short-term gains over long-term environmental sustainability. Therefore, animal justice recommends clear guidelines within the framework that prioritize the protection of wildlife and their habitats over all other considerations. This approach is essential for assuring that CEPA remains true to its fundamental objectives and does not compromise ecosystem health for economic or social considerations. Thank you for the opportunity to share these thoughts with you.
Thank you, Pierre. That was wonderful and definitely aligns with some of the things I've heard through the work we've been doing at the Eco-Network. Now we're going to hear from Anne if she's ready to present. Oh, you're muted, Anne.
Thanks very much for giving me this opportunity. Sorry to be a little late to the proceedings. My name is Anne Lavin. I'm a family physician. I practice in rural Canada. I've practiced in Newfoundland and mostly in Manitoba, and I've been in practice for over 30 years. I do emergency medicine, longitudinal family medicine, personal care, home medicine, a lot of mental health, and I've recently become more activist in the environmental movement with a group called Canadian Association of Physicians for the Environment. We just started during the pandemic, so it's been a little bit of a struggle, but moving along, this is how I came to have this connection. So just to be clear, I do not come from such a legal background. However, through the work I've done in coursework, papers I've written, and readings, I understand that a legal framework is important for many forms of protection as we work in under healthcare too. And as I've come to understand health, not just from an individual, but from population points of view, and the way that our whole environment in all sources impacts immediate and long-term health, it does become a big question, sometimes overwhelming, and often paradoxical, because I've also had to grapple with the fact that many of the parameters that are allowing us to do wonderful things, like have a webinar like this, to have an advanced healthcare system, to have the many comforts and shelters and sources of food that we do, take a great toll on the environment. And it is very difficult to balance those realities and those considerations. For example, healthcare itself produces a large amount of waste. And although it functions under regulations itself, it's not necessarily throughout the entire span of individual items existence. For example, plastics are very difficult to dispose of in healthcare. They don't recycle, they might be contaminated. We probably need to be more regulated, even though we don't really want to be. We feel that we're doing important work, and why should we come under further burden? But it is actually important for each industry, including healthcare, to look within itself, but also to be guided probably more, much more by outside regulations. And in that regard, I do think I can speak to both sides of why it's burdensome, but why it's also necessary to be under some kind of a framework so that we're not worsening the very problems that we are attempting to solve. In that regard, I've also come to understand, and I think especially recent years, many physicians are coming to understand the issue of especially microplastics and a very small particulate matter in the air. The less than 2.5 micrometer sized particles are being implicated in coronary artery disease, respiratory disease, and more recently, possibly one of the causative agents in dementia, which is not to say the only causative agent. And that's the other sometimes confounding factor, is the causal pathway is complex and there are many contributors. And it does not help to oversimplify or over-attribute or blame as a specific entity, but more to take a big picture view and say, what can we understand by learning? Because there is a lot to be understood. And then what can we do about it realistically without compromising the standards at which we work and to a large extent live. And this is what our group has been grappling with. And sometimes we find ourselves coming up against the paradoxes in those senses. It would be definitely worthwhile to have larger understanding and greater oversight by entities such as the legal system, but it would absolutely need to be very reciprocal, in that there would need to be a very solid scientific understanding, which of course changes. It's not always a cut and dried or carved in stone, that would be probably quite regularly revised and have oversight. We know that many industries have not done their share in cleaning up, even when there's known toxins. That shouldn't be, and there absolutely needs to be strengthening in that regard. But as these emerging areas, like I've mentioned, microplastics and less than 2.5 micrometer size particles, well, those go everywhere. It's much more difficult to identify sources, and we're all probably contributing. So how do we address those? And it would be definitely worthwhile, including the lessons learned from animals. And I'm very honored to follow on the presentation about animal health, because I go to many continuing education sessions, and one of the most interesting ones that I went to was about air quality. And the presenter said that the concept of air quality started at a horse show in London, England, a large horse show where many horses died inexplicably. And it was back when coal was used for a fuel and heating source. And it was determined, it took a while, but it was determined that it was because of the respiratory nature of horses' lungs, the exertion they were under, and the fact that they were inhaling large amounts of this contaminated air in hot, humid conditions. And that was the start of the concept of air quality contributing to respiratory health. Whether it contributed to animal rights, I don't know. That took a lot longer. But I really want to acknowledge that we ignore animal health and environmental health at our peril. And just think back a few years, the pandemic, whatever its origins, it almost certainly had to do with animal-human interface, probably environmental degradation, disruptions of various forms of flora, overpopulations and underpopulations that do not keep each other in balance. And here we are. Need I say more in that regard? So we really do have to take that large view, even if it doesn't always give us clear answers, and then constantly be revising a position so as to find the best way forward to minimize toxin exposure at every human's level. Because clearly, yes, we do have a right to the things we both can see and cannot see, can know and cannot know about in our immediate environment, to not be negatively impacting our health. We ask that of our food. Why do we not ask that of the air, water, and land that are around and beneath us? That is kind of a paradox I've also grappled with. In the same time, food is not always scrutinized in its long-term effects, only its immediate impacts. And I think that we have to adopt that more long-term view to keeping ourselves well and our planet well. Thank you very much for giving me this opportunity.
Thank you, Anne. That was great. And I think echoed some of the themes that I heard from Manitobans, as well as what Pierre was saying. So over to Stanny to talk about her perspective.
Hi, everyone. Can you hear me okay? I am another student. I'm here on behalf of the Robson Hall Rights Clinic with Anna and Cassie. And I will hone in a little more specifically on the substantive meaning of the right to a healthy environment. And so, as the discussion paper notes, there is no legal consensus about the meaning and scope of the right to a healthy environment. The implementation framework is supposed to provide more insight into the substantive meaning of this right and the scope of its application under the Canadian Environmental Protection Act, CEPA. We think a broad approach should be taken by the federal government when determining the scope and meaning of the right to a healthy environment. The United Nations approach to the right to a healthy environment is a good example that should be used as a model, as previously mentioned. In July 2022, the United Nations General Assembly recognized that a clean, healthy, and sustainable environment is a universal human right. Such recognition empowers people with the tools to hold accountable those responsible for environmental harm, such as governments and polluters. As you know, Canada supported this resolution and has committed to working with other countries on establishing a common understanding of the content and scope of the right to a clean, healthy, and sustainable environment. We like the way the United Nations has described the elements of a clean, healthy, and sustainable environment. And as Professor Fast outlined them earlier, I will do so now again. There are 6 substantive elements that have been recognized, and they include clean air, a safe and stable climate, access to safe water and adequate sanitation, healthy and sustainably produced food, non-toxic environments in which to live, work, study, and play, and healthy biodiversity and ecosystems. So these elements should be adopted in the implementation framework as a way to describe the substantive meaning of the right and identify the scope of its protections. We also think it's important to recognize that the right to a healthy environment is also related to socioeconomic issues. Environmental degradation disproportionately affects vulnerable groups and people, such as women, girls, and indigenous peoples. When discussing the substantive meaning in the implementation framework, it should be acknowledged that the right to a healthy environment must be realized for all, regardless of their ethnicity, race, religious or political views, sexual orientation, or other such factors. We think that actively guarding the right to a healthy environment is vital for preserving nature, life, and the right of future generations. A broad interpretation of the right that will ensure the full scope of environmental issues facing Canadians is necessary for preserving life and living with dignity today and in the future. Thank you. That's all I have.
Thank you. That was excellent. Okay, back to screen sharing. Again, I'm not seeing any questions or comments, so we'll move on to the next topic. Okay, and over to Sarah.
It looks like it's me. All right, thank you. So procedural duties have already come up a bit. We included these in the discussion document as we thought they were relevant as well in the context of protecting the right under CEPA. So like in the discussion document, we mentioned that procedural duties generally refer to activities related to the process of making decisions. In practice, many of these already exist within CEPA. However, this term isn't generally used or they're not listed as such. So the discussion document explains some areas where we already have some of these procedural duties in place. And this slide here sort of mentions the 3 that we elaborate on in the discussion document. So the first relates to access to information, and that helps support the public in holding governments accountable, helps support the public to participate and engage in decision-making related to health and the environment, which is the next procedural duty, to help with help the public make informed decisions about their own health in the environment. And then the second procedural duty is participation in decision-making, which we highlight in the discussion document as being important to occur early in the process and allowing sufficient time for the public to review, understand, and provide input into decision-making materials or steps. And that efforts should be made to look to include and understand the perspectives of those who are most affected or to be impacted by the decision being made. And then the third procedural duty that I'll get into in following slides as well is effective remedies. And so those are tools that would be available to the public to use if they believe that environmental damages have occurred as a result of contraventions to CEPA. And guidance on how to use these tools should be available to the public as well. So the next couple of slides provide some examples on each of these procedural duties in the CEPA context. So there are many examples you can see listed on the right here, where information is collected and decisions are made under CEPA and it's made available online. So one example would be the CEPA Environmental Registry. So that provides the public with access to information related to CEPA regulations, Canada Gazette notices, permits, plans, and various policies under CEPA. And the goal of this registry is really to provide information to the public on actions being taken under CEPA, as well as proposed actions that are being consulted on. I mentioned earlier too that we need to report into the CEPA annual report on the implementation framework. So this is a report that's submitted to Parliament each year. And so it provides an overview of activities undertaken and the results achieved under CEPA each year. It really gives a sense of the breadth of CEPA. The most recent version has almost 130 pages long. And I'll just maybe mention too, in the future, as a result of the most recent amendments to CEPA, it will need to also report on measures taken to advance reconciliation with Indigenous peoples. So that will be a new element of the report as well. So there's a significant amount of information available. However, we recognize that people living in Canada may not be aware that these resources exist or where to find the information they need. The information may be technical or hard to understand in terms of its practical implications for human health and the environment. So we're certainly interested in hearing through our engagement if there are ideas on how to improve this procedural duty. And so we thank you for your input on that. In terms of the next one, participation in decision-making. So the public and stakeholders, Indigenous people play an important role here. This slide lists some engagement opportunities that are available throughout the CEPA management cycle currently. So there are public comment periods that are associated with every risk assessment and risk management measure that is implemented. So first, a draft will be published for public comment, and which then informs the development of the final product. So similarly to how we're approaching the implementation framework. The public and stakeholders and Indigenous people also have opportunities to participate in decision-making through a variety of websites. So I mentioned that public consultation notices are available on the CEPA registry. There's also a chemicals management plan website, which has a subscription service so that people can sign up to receive like a latest news email update when documents are posted on that website. And then there's also a Government of Canada's Consulting with Canadians page that is often used for the consultation on policy documents and things like that. There's also proactive outreach that will happen by various CEPA programs to Indigenous partners, stakeholders, and the public to inform them and get input on regulatory development as well. So again, interested in hearing how this procedural duty can be improved to help protect the right. And then the last one is effective remedies. And so that refers to tools available to the public to use if they believe that environmental damages have occurred as a result of contraventions to CEPA. So this slide outlines current remedies, including the request of an investigation of an alleged offense. So that's under Section 17 of the Act. There is an ability to file a notice of objection related to permits or proposed regulations or proposed instruments, whereby someone can request that a board of review be established. And so that happens under Section 134 and Section 332 of the Act. There are also opportunities to seek an injunction of a person if a person has experienced or is about to experience a loss or a damage as a result of actions that contravene CEPA or regulations made under CEPA. And so that's under Section 39. And then under Section 40, there is the remedy of pursuing a civil lawsuit to recover damages. So these are tools that are available to the public to use to request the government act or to act themselves when they believe environmental damages or contraventions to CEPA have occurred. And so one of the questions in the discussion document and what we're interested in hearing is perspectives on what, like how access to these remedies can be improved, if there's something we can do there. So that is the last slide on procedural duties. I have here our contact information. So certainly I think the feedback received, submissions being made on the discussion document can be sent to our generic email address here. And we hope to hear from many people attending this webinar. And certainly our links to our webpage that has our discussion document posted is shared on this slide as well. So I think that's the last slide. I can pass it back to Heather.
Thanks, Sarah. So I think before I get into the input, I will just point out that we have thought about this section a little bit in a little bit of a different way. So the government has framed things as kind of procedural duties, so things that the government is going to be responsible for providing and doing. And the way that we're thinking of it from a community perspective is what are the actual tangible tools and changes that we're going to see. So that's why the terminology is a little bit different there. So you've already heard some things from me in other parts of kind of practical outcomes and different supports that citizens would like to see in the context of public participation and access to information and access to remedies. But I'm going to reiterate some of those just to be clear about the kind of main themes we're hearing. So overall, I think one of the things that the public and Manitobans are expecting to see improve as a result of recognition of the right to a healthy environment and the implementation framework is that opportunities for public participation are going to change and be more accessible for citizens at all levels of understanding and involvement. In terms of public participation, we've heard from lots of people that there's a need for more supports. So in particular, funding and access to expert information to support public engagement. So as we've already talked a few times and you've heard from different presenters, there's a lot of technical information involved in CEPA decision-making processes, and even as a member of the public, trying to understand what's going on can be very tricky. So if there's a community or an organization that is wanting to engage in these processes, sometimes we need to hire an expert, a scientist, or some other type of technical expert to help us truly understand what some of these things mean. So supports that will increase capacity of public participants are definitely a kind of outcome and tool that we would like to see be made available as a result of the implementation framework. In terms of public participation, we've heard that there should be a wider variety of opportunities to engage, including a number of suggestions to use social media as a way to inform people, but also to get them aware of these different opportunities that are available. And there were a range of different suggestions in terms of social media platforms. So I would just suggest that the more social media, the better is what we're kind of hearing. Along those same lines, more advertising of opportunities to engage. And a very common theme that, again, you've heard me voice already is that there should be a real focus on engaging with youth and developing new processes so that they can be meaningfully involved at all stages. And that ultimately improving public participation is going to require access to a broad range of plain language information and supports to help us understand the information that can't quite be translated into plain language. In terms of access to information, which is very much directly connected to the feedback we received for public participation, again, we've heard feedback that there's a need for more access to information in a variety of formats. This access to information also includes the need for collection of new data. So part of the problem that we've heard in terms of people accessing existing data is they're finding they either can't find what they're looking for because it's too hard, or they can't find what they're looking for because it doesn't exist. So when it comes down to data specific to Manitoba, for example, there are definite gaps in terms of the type of information you can access about chemical contamination, and a lot of the registries have information that is more limited to certain areas of the province instead of providing kind of a comprehensive understanding of how things are working in different areas. And we also heard from Manitobans that there's a need for kind of new innovative studies. So there are a lot of uncertainties and still a lot of learning that needs to be done around things like cumulative effects and the long-term implication of some of these processes. So again, starting to think about now how to collect baseline data and track things so we better understand how things might change over time is an important piece of understanding things and also being able to evidence later on if something has gone wrong or needs to be changed. And we did have a lot of feedback also that it would be helpful if there was more information at the school level. So high school was mentioned in particular, as well as university. So youth are better informed about what CEPA is all about and all of the different processes and opportunities that exist there. And that it would ultimately help with a kind of basic knowledge for Canadians to better understand what is going on. And another comment we had is in terms of access to information, it would be nice for more kind of Manitoba specific examples, whether that's through the media coverage or otherwise, so that Manitobans can understand more specifically what the kind of consequences are that people are facing in terms of environmental and health impacts, but also how some of these CEPA processes have been used in the past to benefit Manitobans. And I know the team has done some excellent work and actually do have some good examples now of Manitoba that we've discussed in the past. So again, just more kind of contextual specific information. So the public can get a better sense of how things actually work here in Manitoba. I just wanted to take us back to the Healthy Environment, Healthy Neighborhood project again, as the need for more information and more data was one of the big outcomes and recommendations from this project. And I also will probably get in trouble if I don't mention that although access to information is very important, we need to be very careful that more information is not the only solution being provided. So there's already a big onslaught of information, but when we're thinking about new data that needs to be collected or making plain language versions of information that already exists, we need to think carefully about what it is being collected for and how it's going to be used, and to make sure that it's not just a commitment to actual collection of information, which is something the environmental community hears a lot, is yes, we'll do a study on that, but actually being able to see the results and knowing things are actually happening behind the scenes is an important piece of this need for more information and data. And then finally, in terms of the access to remedies piece, again, one of the most kind of promising aspects of recognition of the right to a healthy environment is the idea that there are going to be more legal tools that citizens can use to engage in different types of CEPA processes and ultimately help make sure that those who have caused harm receive the punishments that they deserve. So again, polluters needing to be held more accountable, and that punishment needs to be more than just a monetary fine. We had some suggestions about how industry should be responsible for paying for more cleanups and emergency things that happen. So I know there's already been discussions of moving some of the money from enforcement into other types of initiatives for the public. So we had a suggestion for industry to pay into a cleanup fund of sorts. And then, as you've already heard from a few of the students, and I think you're going to hear again shortly, from a legal perspective, there is still a need to address some of the problems and barriers contained in CEPA. Again, that's not something we know we're going to see directly out of the implementation framework, but this is definitely an opportunity for the departments to articulate that this is something that is still needed and that citizens ultimately are going to need to see to make sure that access to remedies piece is available. And so I'm going, to stop sharing, and then we will hear from our final two presenters. Okay, so first we're going to hear from Keza.
Hi, everyone. My name is Keza Witanze. I'm also a student at Robson Hall, Faculty of Law, not with the Rights Clinic, though. Thank you for coming here today to listen to my feedback on the development of a right to a healthy environment framework under CEPA. I ended up having more questions than feedback, but I've done my best to provide some insights. And I've chosen to approach this topic from an environmental justice lens. My own interest in environmental justice is where it intersects with racism. So as a member of the Black Law Students Association, I had the pleasure of attending the national conference last year in Halifax. And I was able to take a tour of the Africville Museum, where we listened to 3 survivors of the era explain what life was like at the time. And so for anyone who is unfamiliar with Africville, I'll give you the very shortened version of it. But it's that the government of Halifax introduced various industrial additions to the area, like railroads, 2 slaughterhouses, an open-air city dump, and an infectious diseases hospital, which harmed the sole water supply, the air quality, and the general living conditions of the predominantly Black residents. And so this went on for decades until 1970, when the city evicted the last person remaining there. So even though I've learned a lot, I still find the topic of environmental justice and rights-based approaches to be very complicated. And part of this complication is what makes the topic so difficult to give feedback on. The sort of very technical aspects of it, the confusion on how to approach it, the lack of environmental rights or information about it in Canada. Just to echo Anna's thoughts from before, if the students at the Rights Clinic doing research are having trouble with it, then it needs to be more accessible for the general public. And so I've focused my comments today on access to information and public participation in CEPA processes. So to me, one of the most important pieces of this consultation process is to ensure there is meaningful engagement with the public and Indigenous communities on what the right to a healthy environment means to them and how it should change the way things are done under CEPA. So the discussion document mentions that public participation and intergovernment cooperation, which includes Indigenous engagement, is an important component of CEPA processes. Based on this document and what is available about CEPA processes, there wasn't enough information to fully understand the role of public and Indigenous stakeholders. In particular, I would be interested to learn more about how Indigenous communities and government are included in CEPA decision-making processes and other related activities. This includes information in future consultation documents about the involvement of Indigenous peoples in the first part of the implementation framework consultation. So when I was researching this topic, there seems to be lots of information about how dangerous certain chemicals are to bodily health over time, starting from infancy onwards. And although I saw mention that there are measures being used to protect citizens and vulnerable populations, it's not exactly clear how CEPA processes are protecting Canadians. So it would be useful if the implementation framework clarified the role of the public and Indigenous communities in CEPA processes and explained how the right to a healthy environment is going to better protect them from harmful impacts and improve their ability to meaningfully participate. More public participation online would be great too, and I think Heather mentioned social media as one way, so that would be great. From an environmental justice perspective, it is important to ensure the voices of all Canadians are heard and their input carefully considered when decisions are made that could affect their health and environment. So personally speaking, if a change was being made that could affect my health or the environment in my community, I would like to be heavily consulted before the use of chemicals or irreversible land development began. There's also a need for more research and data collection, as I think, as Heather just said, about the long-term health impacts of chemical contamination, particularly in areas where vulnerable populations and indigenous communities have lived in close proximity to contaminated areas. While I appreciate the chemical substances page, which offered great tips for protecting our health, it's scary, frightening even, how many substances we have to be worried about. There is some information available on government websites about the potential harms chemicals can cause to the environment and the human body, but there is a lack of information about cumulative impacts and long-term implications. It would also be helpful to get more information about how scientific and indigenous knowledge is actually used in CEPA decision-making processes. I believe something to that effect was said earlier as well, but it's good to reiterate. It is difficult to provide suggestions for improving this area when it's not clear exactly how things are working currently. So thank you for listening to my feedback today. And although the legal implications of the new right to a healthy environment under CEPA are not yet clear, I'm excited for the possibilities the recognition of environmental rights could create, including better protection of human health and the environment. Thank you.
Thanks so much. And then we'll go to our final presenter, Cassie.
I am the last and final part of the Rights Clinic presentation. So I'm going to be talking about procedural rights that should be provided under CEPA so that residents can ensure their environmental rights are protected. Before I jump into it, I want to note that I'm a mother of 2 young children. So stemming from that fact is my belief that we need to do more to prioritize the protection of the environment, not only for ourselves, but also to ensure the health of the environment for future generations pursuant to the principle of intergenerational equity. That being said, I have felt a real sense of powerlessness in relation to environmental rights and protections, and a big part of that is a lack of accessible procedural rights that allows the public to enforce substantive rights. Something to recognize about that is that I have felt powerless, even with the privileges and advantages afforded to me as a cisgendered white woman who also happens to be in law school. I'm a visual person, so I've come to understand procedural rights through a metaphor. So I imagine a community well that supplies all of the water for the community. The water is obviously at the bottom of the well. Each resident is responsible for gathering their own water, but the question remains, how do these residents access that water? So the right to the water in this case is a substantive right. Without intervention, they won't actually be able to access it. So the community organizers get together and they decide that they must provide a bucket at the well and build a crank or pulley system so that each resident has a way to get to that water. The residents now have a right to the procedure that allows them access to the water, and that's the bucket and crank or pulley system. So procedural rights in that thought, then in an environmental right context, would mean the legal tools and government supports that each resident can use in order to enforce their substantive right to a healthy environment. In the discussion paper, the procedural elements of the right to a healthy environment are described as procedural duties. I'm going to discuss 2 of these categories of procedural rights or duties that we think are particularly important. That's public participation and access to justice. First, with participation in decision-making, we feel that it is important that every resident should have the right to participate in CEPA processes because a healthy environment is for everyone. An important connection can be made between public participation and the principles of environmental justice and intergenerational equity. Environmental harms often impact disadvantaged and marginalized groups more frequently and on a greater scale. And that's something that policy and drafters may not have a lived experience of. So they might not even know that these issues exist. Therefore, it's important that the implementation framework provides guidance and new supports to ensure that all Canadians have the ability to protect their rights and to have their voices heard. As Anna has mentioned earlier, this topic can be difficult for law students, which doesn't inspire a lot of confidence that a member of the general public would be able to navigate the complexities of the legislation. One of the ways that this information could be more accessible is through publicly available plain language, which has been mentioned, guides, and maybe how-to videos with closed captioning. These are small and simple measures that you could take, but they would go a long way to address the inaccessibility that acts as a barrier to public participation because the public can't participate in something that they don't understand. Second, access to justice or access to remedies as it's phrased in the discussion paper. This procedural element is also connected to the theme of public participation because in order for Canadians to meaningfully participate in CEPA processes and ensure their environmental rights are protected, procedural elements that facilitate access to justice are needed. There are long-standing problems that have been recognized with Section 17 to 22 of the Canadian Environmental Protection Act that have actually prevented citizens from accessing environmental justice. In particular, we think it's really problematic that Section 22 of the Act has never successfully been used to initiate a citizen lawsuit, and it's telling. While we know that that's outside the scope of the implementation framework, we suggest the federal government consider future amendments to CEPA in order to ensure citizens have access to environmental justice if their rights have been violated, including the ability to initiate action in court. If we hearken back to the well metaphor, the community organizers would not only have to explain how to use the system they've implemented to access the water, but they would also have to make necessary accommodations for those who are unable to use that system as it is. Otherwise, that right to the water is meaningless. We hope that our feedback has shed some light on the way the newly recognized principles, substantive rights, and procedural rights could be explained and implemented in a way that will help to meaningfully protect the right to a healthy environment. By including our suggested approaches in the implementation framework, we feel residents will be better able to exercise their environmental rights and hold polluters accountable when their environmental rights have been violated. Thank you very much for having us and for your time.
Thanks very much. So not seeing any further questions or comments in the chat, I am going to say a big thank you to everyone who joined us today, and especially the presenters. And I'm going to hand things over to my co-moderator, Chantel, for some final closing thoughts. Chantel, over to you.
Hi, everyone. It was a great discussion and I learned a lot. So yeah, just it's been a great panel and a lot of like panelists, and I'm just blessed to be able to be part of it. I just want to give a sort of a plug for Manitoba Eco-Network. So if you're interested in getting in contact with Manitoba Eco-Network, our email is info@mbenetwork.org. Sorry, is that the so if you had any follow-up questions about the webinar, you can send us an email there. Other options, if you want to get more involved with Manitoba Eco-Network or stay up to date on what we're doing, you can also sign up for our Eco Journal, and you can also check out our website where you can do that sign up. Or if you want to sort of like support our work, we are a charitable organization, so you can donate one time or on a monthly basis, or even better, sign up and pay for a membership, either as an organization or an individual. So yeah, and just want to say that some of the Indigenous organizations and projects we're involved in is with Waniskatan, Camp Morningstar, and other organizations, MEJC, for example. So yeah, and that's all I got for you. So,
Thanks, Chantel.
Thanks everyone for
So just to remind everyone, a recording of this event will be available, and a copy of the written submission the Eco-Network will be making before the 8th, because that's the deadline. It will also be available on our website. And so we definitely encourage all Manitobans to speak up and provide their feedback in this process, and to make their own submissions or engage online through the variety of ways that the implementation team has provided. And there are links to those opportunities both in the slide deck that we'll publish as well as on our website. So thanks very much to everyone who came out today. and stay tuned for more from the Eco Network on environmental rights. Thanks, everyone.